Hey there. In this video, I'd like to take a look at coronary arteries, which are the arteries that supply blood to the heart, with relation to myocardial bridges. Because a lot of people like me, like I was when I was first diagnosed with a myocardial bridge in 2018, they really have no idea where these coronary arteries are, what their names are, why they matter, are there different types, those kinds of things. And so that's some of the stuff that I want to take a look at and hopefully clarify in this video. So let's jump in. When we're talking about coronary arteries, coronary means related to the heart, supplying blood to the heart. But there's two kinds. And it's often taught as highways and side roads. Okay, so the big coronary arteries, which are usually the ones that myocardial bridges are identified on, are the highways. Okay, those are the epicardial. Epi means outside. So epicardial, cardio means heart, means outside the heart, because epicardial arteries actually are supposed to be outside the heart. They're not supposed to go into the heart per se. So, in other words, there are highways that take the blood to the heart most of the way, but then the last leg of the trip, so to speak, it's smaller arteries that actually deliver the blood into the heart muscle. And those smaller ones are called microvascular on the bottom left there, microvascular arteries. Those are the side roads that come off of the big ones, the epicardial arteries. So if you look on the right, you can see some different, the pictures there, the epicardial arteries are the big ones. Again, the ones that myocardial bridges are usually identified on. Then you got the smaller ones that shoot off of that, and then they kind of like branch down a network, smaller and smaller branches. So if you look at the bottom on the left, it says intramural. Only one of these types of arteries is supposed to be intramural, and that is the microvascular ones. And what intramural means is that intra means inside, and then mural means like walls. And so, like if you play intramural sports, that means you're playing other people within the walls of the building, like a school or something. But an intramural course of arteries means it goes into the heart muscle. So the microvessels that are the side roads off of the highways, they are supposed to go in. They are supposed to go into the heart muscle. And they do. And that's how the heart gets its blood. But they're supposed to feed the heart. But when we talk about an intramural course of an epicardial artery, like the one that has the myocardial bridge, that's also, in other words, you might see in your report, sometimes they write it in different ways. And this artery takes an intramural course. And that's not normal for an epicardial artery. That means that artery has a myocardial bridge, essentially. In other words, it's going into the heart wall. Either it's bridge, which means it's totally tunneling under the heart wall, or it's just partly like embedded in the heart wall. Okay, so the heart muscle itself. Okay, we're going to look at that more in a second. Okay, so the epicardial arteries are not supposed to be intramural. They're not supposed to be in the heart. And when they're in there, that's a problem. That's when you get your myocardial bridges. So if you look at this diagram, this puts a diagram to what we're talking about. These big red arteries here, these are the epicardial arteries, these bigger ones. Okay, so these are the epicardial coronary arteries. They're supposed to be outside the heart. There's a whole network of smaller microvessels that are shooting off of these, but we don't see them in the picture because they're not there. They're too small to show in this picture. We just confuse it. So any of these, it's a big point to really highlight that even though usually they look for myocardial bridges on the left anterior descending artery, the LAD, that's what they're typically looked for and then typically diagnosed there. Any of these arteries can have a myocardial bridge, and any of those can be a problem. Any of those can cause symptoms. So that's actually a big myth that needs to be busted, because it's kind of a circular, it's a self-reinforcing myth that when doctors are told or think that they're only supposed to be looking on the LAD for bridges, myocardial bridges, and then they do that, then you're only going to find them on the LAD because you're not looking anywhere else, right? You're not going to find anything where you're not looking there. Okay. So let's take a look at these different coronary arteries and see um, where they are and where they go and how they're all connected. Now, on the right in this picture, you can see that is clearly a myocardial bridge because the artery is taking an intramural course. It's diving into the heart muscle. And like the Loch Ness monster, it's like going under and then coming back out again. You can see that clearly. Okay. But that one, somebody, by the way, sent me that on their phone. Somebody on their Facebook support group, Myocardial Bridge support group, they sent me that on their phone. And I just scribbled that on there. I do that like with tons of people, like over 100 something people who have sent me their pictures. And you can see it clearly. And the irony of that is that nobody diagnosed that. I mean, I did, but I'm not a doctor. But no doctor told them that. And they somehow in their mind, they had a feeling or an idea that they had more bridges and they sent it to me. And then sure enough, they were right. It's unmistakable. I mean, it's obviously going right into the heart muscle. Okay, so that's a good example of what a myocardial bridge can look like on a three-dimensional model, which is what that is. In particular on the RCA, the right coronary artery, not the LAD, where they're usually looked for. So let's take a look at this list on the left of all the major epicardial coronary arteries. You've got the LAD, the left anterior descending, and I'm going to go through this in a second and show where they are. The LCX, the left circumflex, the right coronary artery, which is the biggest one for most people. Then the diagonals, D1 and D2. Sometimes there's the D3, diagonal 1, diagonal 2, etc. Then you got what they call the marginal arteries, either marginal or sometimes they call it obtuse marginal. So say OM1 a lot, obtuse marginal 1, obtuse marginal 2, which actually come off of the LCX. And then the PDA, the posterior, which means back, descending artery, which means going down, descending. And then the right marginal artery. Okay, so that's that list I'm giving you is because it's the main arteries that myocardial bridges can be diagnosed on. If you've got diagnosis of a myocardial bridge, usually it's on the LAD, but even if it's not, it's probably on one of those. So let's go back to this picture and take a tour of where these arteries are and how they're all connected. Now, it kind of looks like mumbo jumbo, right? Like big bowl of spaghetti, until you realize how it's all connecting. Because all of these arteries that you see in this picture ultimately are fed by the same basic giant tube, the basic artery, right? Which is the aorta. Okay, so the aorta is the big tube right in the middle of your chest, right? That all these other ones are branching off from, the big tree trunk. It's an upside down tree trunk because they're going down. Okay, so you can see where my pointer is over here. Here's the aorta. And as it comes down, you can see that, remember, it's a mirror image, right? So in if you're looking at someone, the right of the viewer, you looking at it, is the left of the person whose heart it is. And the left side, as you look at it, is the right side of the person you're looking at, right? Just like a normal person you'd be looking at. So you can see off the aorta, there's two main arteries, just two, right? There's one to the left, there's one to the right. That's it. Those are sort of the branches before the ones where usually the bridges are. And those two branches are the left coronary artery, LCA, and then the right coronary artery. Now, they do different things after that. They're very different after that. And this is how the doctors can easily tell which one's which, because they have common patterns that are very different once you get off of the aorta, away from the aorta. So we can let's start on the right coronary artery, which is the left side of this picture as you look at it. So the right coronary artery, again, is the biggest one of all, typically. And you can see it comes straight down, okay? But then there's some major side arteries coming off of it. One is towards the bottom there called the right marginal artery, which means it's going off to the side. It's supplying sort of the front of the heart. Like the anterior means front. So it's right marginal. It's kind of supplying the front of the heart. But then as you look and it keeps on going, it actually wraps underneath RCA, wraps underneath and goes all the way around. Then there's like a branch that comes off of it, but way at the tail. There's a branch like at the tail. And that branch is called the posterior, which means rear, like or back, posterior descending artery, PDA. Okay, so you can see it over here. It's like on the back side of the heart, way back. That's supplying the lower back of the heart. Okay, so the right marginal is supplying the lower front of the heart. The posterior descending is supplying the lower back of the heart. Okay, all from that one RCA. It's a lot going on there, just from that one artery. Okay, there's other smaller ones coming off, but they're less significant and come up less. But they can be bridged too. Any of these could be bridged, and meaning have a myocardial bridge. And to be clear, my own personal case, I had a lot of these. I had 7 myocardial bridges unroofed, and I had, I think, two big ones on that right coronary artery. Something like a total of 7 centimeters, like 4 and 3 centimeters together on the same artery. That's just one. And then I had 7 arteries, seven myocardial bridges on, I think, 5 arteries, something like that. Okay, so that's the right side of the heart. Let's go to the left side. So the left coronary artery, you can see that is totally different in the sense that it comes off the aorta, right here. Here comes off the aorta on the left side, but almost immediately splits in two. They call that a bifurcation. So if you see bifurcation on the report, bi meaning two, that's what you're talking about. That's a bifurcation right there. That's one bifurcation. Okay, so this is the bifurcation. What are the 2 arteries called after that? Good question. Okay, so then they get the names that we are more familiar with on reports. This side of the bifurcation comes down the front of the heart. And front is anterior. Okay, so this is called the left. Why left? Because it's coming off the left coronary artery. Okay, left and then anterior, meaning left and then front, and then descending. Because why? Because it's going down, it's descending. So left, anterior, front, descending, going down, artery. Okay, so left anterior descending, or LAD, is this big one, coming all the way down like this. And that's the one that typically bridges are diagnosed on. Okay. Why do they tend to look there so much? Because that's the one that, of all of them, that one especially supplies blood to the left ventricle, the upper left chamber of the heart, which is the ventricle, the part of the heart that blood leaves from, right? It's like the launch point for blood throughout the entire body. So like if that's not working right, that's really a problem because the heart's not pumping blood out very well. So like they're all important, all these arteries, but that particular one is like especially important. And in addition to the LAD, left anterior descending, there are 2 branches off of that, which are also important, and they can and often are bridged too. So they would be your D1 and D2, your diagonals, called that because they are diagonal. Left anterior descending comes down. And see here, this is the D1. It literally comes off at like a 45-degree angle from the LAD right here, splits off. And then down further here comes the D2, also branching off at a 45-degree angle, diagonal. And there can be a D3 for some people. The bodies are different a little bit sometimes. Okay. Now, so those are additionally, and I had that unroofed too. My D1 artery also had to be unroofed as well. And many people do. I've seen lots of people with diagonals who have bridges on them. Now, if we go from the LAD, this branch off of the left coronary artery, flip over here. This one is called the LCX, left circumflex, and it's big. It's big too. It goes this way off to the side. Okay, so it's like circling around, circumflex, meaning it bends around. Okay, see how it bends around to the back of the heart back here? Bends all the way around. So even though it's coming off on the left, it actually goes like towards the front, actually coming around to the back, supplying the back of the heart back here, right? All of this. Remember, there's all these little side roads coming off of that we don't see in the picture. And those are called, the side roads, by the way, are called septal arteries, the little ones that come off into the heart. So that LCX is a big one. That can be bridged, and it's a big one too. It's important. And mine was bridged. I think it might have even had 2, or I forget, but it was actually, no, I think it was a big one, like 5 centimeters, just one big one. I had to have that unroofed as well. Off of the LCX, this one going down like this is actually significant. It's the M1 or the OM1, the marginal or obtuse marginal artery. And then there's an OM2 down here, the marginal 2 or obtuse marginal 2 artery down here. And if I'm not mistaken, those were bridged, and I had those unroofed as well. Okay, at least one of those, maybe two actually. Okay, so the point is, all of these, those are the major arteries that can be bridged, and smaller ones can be bridged too, but those are the ones that typically get unroofed. If anything's going to get unroofed, and just to say it, like it's really important to realize that many times these bridges, when they're on the other arteries, they will often never be found on a scan. Partly because people often don't look for these other ones on scans, these other arteries, besides the LAD, number one, if they even look for the LAD, which is, that alone is not guaranteed. But also because a lot of things show up with your eyeballs looking at it, or with the scope that they use during surgery for robotic, whatever, that don't show up on a scan. These bridges don't always come up very well on scans. People have to realize that they're not very good. Like the scans are like, the scans, like the CT scans and the cardiac catheterizations, are showing a three-dimensional heart and three-dimensional arteries in two dimensions. So the angle can just be bad and you don't see it very well sometimes. So the angle, depending on which of the 256 whatever angles you're looking at in that particular slice of the CT or whatever, you may not notice the bridge as much depending on how it is and all these things. There's lots of factors. Okay, my point being that many times bridges will not be diagnosed until the guy's in there doing the surgery. And that was the case in my second surgery. We went in there thinking about 3 bridges, and the guy found, he unroofed 7. And then he said there were more small ones, but they were smaller. He was arteries, and he was hesitant to try to unroof them, because if he tried to unroof them, he might cut this little tiny artery and snap it in half. So it didn't do it. Okay, but the point being is he actually discovered more bridges during surgery than we even considered, than we even saw on the images before surgery. So that's a very common thing. So to just get another perspective on this, what is this artery supposed to be doing if it's not in the heart? Like, where is it supposed to be? Okay, that's important to realize for myocardial bridges. Like, where are these arteries supposed to be? So that you can see why a myocardial bridge is a problem. Like, what is it? Where's the error, right? What's off? So if you look at these pictures on the left, this is showing you hearts that are covered in this yellow stuff, which is fat. Another name for fat is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue. Okay, so it's like chicken fat, right? It's round meat or something, right? So the heart is a muscle, and that's what meat is, and it's got fat on it. Okay, and essentially that's the yellow stuff up in the top diagram as well. Now the fancy name for that, because it's epicardial, that fat is outside the heart, around the outside of the heart, and epicardial, and it's adipose tissue. So epicardial, E, adipose, A, tissue, T. Put it all together, you get EAT. That's the actual acronym for that. Okay, see right there, the EAT, the epicardial adipose tissue, the epicardial fat, the fat that's supposed to be hanging around on the outside of your heart. And that's exactly where these arteries that can be bridged, they're supposed to be there. That's where they're supposed to be, meaning they're not. So you can see like the groove right here, right? This is the front of your heart. This would be probably your LAD right here, this groove. And that artery is supposed to be sitting in that groove in fat. It's supposed to be just hanging out, lying in fat. And if it's in fat, and there's that buffer of yellow fat between the artery and the heart, the muscle, there can't be a bridge, right? As long as it's got a whole like mat of fat between it and the heart, it can't be in the heart. That would mean it penetrated the fat, went in through the muscle, and came out, So that shows you what's supposed to be happening. There's supposed to be this kind of wall of fat, this barrier between the artery, the big artery, and the heart. And only the small side roads are the ones that are supposed to be going actually into the heart. Okay, it shows you both sides. There's actually another groove back here in the posterior back of the heart too. Okay, so that's what's supposed to be happening. But like I said, um, in a myocardial bridge, that artery goes through the fat and penetrates into the heart muscle, which is called the myo, which means muscle, and then cardium, which means heart. So myo, muscle, cardium, heart, muscle, heart, so it's heart muscle. Okay, so myocardium means heart muscle. That all that pink stuff is the heart muscle. So why is it a myocardial bridge? Well, because if one of these arteries that's supposed to be out here ends up going through the fat in here, where my pointer is, and coming through here like this, that means it's diving into the myocardium. Okay, so it's underneath, it's tunneling underneath. And then that means that some of that myocardium, like here comes the artery like a tube, like this, through it, some of that myocardium is going to be on top of it. Like here's the artery coming through, and it's like on top, some of that meat, that muscle. And that anything that goes on top of something else goes over it is a bridge. It's bridging over it, right? It's going over top, right? So the myocardial bridge technically is the part of that muscle that's over top of the artery, whatever that part is. It could be even a paper thin bit. Sometimes it is, but the surgeon at Stanford told me to my face that even a paper thin band of muscle on top can quote unquote wreak havoc, can be very damaging, cause lots of spasms and pains and stuff like that. Okay. Or it can be deep. Some of these myocardial bridges are so deep in the myocardium, some of them are extremely deep. And then some of them are so deep, this is rare, but they happen. Some of them are so deep that they actually go all the way through the heart muscle into the space, into the chamber where the blood's hanging out, and then come back down out again. And in those cases, what they do, if the good doctors, sometimes they just leave it there if they're not doing a good job. I think they should do it, I think. But the ones that do it successfully, they actually just make a little hole in the heart. They cut the heart away where they actually cut through the heart wall and to pull out the artery, like pull it out from the space and then sew it up later, sew up your heart wall again. Okay, sew up the myocardium. Okay, so that's why it's called the myocardial bridge. It's not even supposed to be anywhere near this myocardium. It's supposed to be outside this fat artery. And sometimes because of a congenital condition, you're born with this. Yeah, some people's arteries will dive into this muscle and get stuck in there. That's not supposed to be there because every time the heart muscle squeezes, that pink stuff, the myocardium, it squeezes every heartbeat, means it's cutting off circulation. But like we have on our video on YouTube, myth number one is that that's all there is. It's only a problem when it's squeezing, cutting off circulation. And a lot of doctors, just to repeat the myth, a lot of doctors believe, well, that means that myocardial bridges can't be a problem because the squeezing part of the heartbeat cycle is only 15% of the time of the heartbeat cycle, which is true. 15% of the heartbeat cycle is the squeezing part, systole. But what they don't realize is that it's been proven like many times over that when the artery gets squashed, like a garden hose that you step on, when that myocardium squashes on the artery doesn't just like pop back open any more than a garden hose pops back open. If you ever stepped in a garden hose, it goes like, and then it goes, and it very slowly makes its way open again, right? Very slowly. That's pretty much what the artery does. It's very slow to reopen. So in that other 85% of the time, when it's not getting technically squeezed anymore, it doesn't mean it's open now. It means that it's on its way open. And in some cases, it actually is so slow in reopening that it never actually totally opens. It's just like constant state of some level of squashness. So you could be losing half of your blood flow, 60, 70, 80, sometimes 90% of your blood flow through that artery because of the continuous state of being squashed, of compression, as they say. In other words, a percent compression, right? 50%, 30%, 70%. That's what that means. Now, I'm about to show you how this looks on a CT scan, meaning how the fat, the myocardium, and the artery are all supposed to show up on a CT scan. So, because then you can read these better for yourself. And the key is going to be when we look at this picture right here, okay, for example, the key is going to be that this yellow stuff EAT, right? The epicardial adipose tissue it's supposed to be black. That's how it comes up on a CT scan, black. So if the artery is supposed to be out here, right, outside the heart, we should see a black layer and then the heart muscle underneath. And the heart muscle should be gray, some level of gray. So the myocardium, heart muscle should be gray, and the fat, the adipose tissue should be black, and then the artery beyond that. Let's take a look. So here's a picture where up here on the top of this artery, this is the LAD, and this is the upper part over here. It goes down to the right. The upper part, you can see, yeah, there's a layer of black stuff, right? Like that's fat. That's fat right there. That's supposed to be there. That's fat. That's okay. But notice what's happening. See how there's this little gauzy, filmy kind of stuff right there? That gray stuff? That means that what that is little bits of very super thin myocardial bridging, little filmy bridging, okay, that starts up. And you can see it gets worse. It gets more and more pronounced the further you go down. By the way, these are the septal. These are the side roads that come off here, right? These little side roads and side arteries, the microvessels. And as you come down, then you really see it kicks in. The myocardial bridging really kicks in at the bottom. How do we know that? Because as you come down, you start to see the telltale signs. Not only do you see the filmy stuff, but also see here, right there, it really starts to be more pronounced, right? The artery is now getting really under more layer of the heart. It's still superficial. This is a superficial bridge. It's more to the outside, but it's getting stronger. And you can even see that in the artery itself. Because look how it was fat. And then right there, all of a sudden, whoops, it lost about a third of its thickness right there. It's this diameter, right? And then also got pulled. See how it's getting pulled closer to the heart right there? Okay, like dipping in. And they often call that a step down, step up pattern. And then it goes on and on and on. There's some more bridging towards the end down here. Okay, so this is a very thin and subtle myocardial bridge that might often get mistaken or missed, might often get missed. But there's obvious telltale signs. You can see all this gray filmy stuff is not supposed to be there. It's supposed to look black like this up here. And the arteries doesn't normally just suddenly get thinner and then also suddenly get pulled towards the heart like that. Okay, so that's a very subtle example. But this is a not so subtle example. This is a more obvious example. This kind of one, there's no excuse for missing this one for the radiologist. This one, the bottom of it looks more normal. Here's your, the yellow stuff, the fat is supposed to be black. So at the bottom, this black stuff is the yellow fat, right? That looks like it's a buffer between the artery and the heart. So that looks okay for the most part. But then up here, whoa, not only is there no fat, like the fat is way out here and the artery is way in here. So you can clearly see it's underneath the myocardium, right? And that means that all this stuff here, this gray myocardium, this heart muscle, that is the bridge. That's the bridging. That's what's bridging over the artery. That stuff right there, that, which is why they put these two little markers there to actually show it looks like the deepest point. They probably found the deepest point and put it there. There are other signs too, right? Again, you can see how it kind of artery comes down and then see how it kind of goes, whoops, steps down a little bit there. And also the artery suddenly becomes flat. When an artery is like in the heart and it suddenly becomes flat like that, it's another telltale sign. Right? It suddenly flattens out. Okay, so that one's a pretty obvious myocardial bridge. Black fat for most of the artery except the top, where it's just non-existent. And that means there's no buffer of fat, and clearly it's under the gray myocardium. So these cases I'm showing you in these pictures are pretty subtle compared to, to me, they're obvious, but a really obvious myocardial bridge just dives down into the heart. It's patently obvious, right? So I'm showing you ones that might get missed sometimes. But this one, look, again, here's the gray heart muscle over here, and the black is the fat. So the top of it's A-OK, right? But now you get to this point, and all of a sudden, boom, suddenly all that goes away. Like that layer of fat disappears, and now it's just artery muscle. So this is superficial, but you can see how it immediately gets right here. It just suddenly gets very thin, just like that. And a super telltale sign is when big and fat, meaning patent, means wide, suddenly gets thin, but then later goes back to being thicker again. So in other words, it didn't just peter out and taper down. It's totally unnatural to get thinner and then to get thicker later. And it doesn't, that's not how it works. Usually it gets gradually thinner and thinner as you go down. So this one, you can clearly see this whole middle section right here is all some type of thin bridging, some superficial bridging. But this is a great example of how you can clearly see that that artery is, it looks like someone's just stepping on it, right? That's how squashed that thing looks in that area where this pointer is compared to what it ought to be, like this or down here like this. And yet it doesn't look that deep. So it doesn't look deep. That shows you that a superficial bridge, meaning superficial means like towards not that deep, basically, towards the outside, just a little bit of thin, paper thin, even layers of muscle on top can do that, can squash an artery that much. It seems like how, but it happens. We see it a lot. But superficial bridges can do that, can essentially compress your artery and make you lose, what would you say, maybe like at least 50% of the width of your artery. So it's 50%, 60%, maybe even 70% compression just from a superficial bridge. Okay. And you see similar on the right. Okay. Again, it's not particularly deep, but black fat's disappearing and then it's right up against. It's essentially, it looks like the way you could describe how this looks. It doesn't look like it's buried in the heart. It looks like it's pinned to the heart by a thin layer of myocardium. We're just kind of pinning it up there. And that can be really bad in terms of symptoms, just to be pinned like that. So these are things that I think the radiologists don't understand a lot of this. Some of the radiologists, I think, are just looking for, they find the most obvious ones, right? Where here's an artery going, whoa, into the heart and coming back out. Yeah, I mean, a 4-year-old could find that, right? But even those sometimes get overlooked. These are the ones I think they get overlooked a lot, where they're just looking for a pattern so obvious and stark, but they're not realizing, look, this artery is obviously getting stepped on here. It's getting squashed in a major way. And they just kind of don't, they're looking for that. They're looking for that artery to go way in here like this and dive in, and not realizing that not all bridges look like that, and they don't have to look like that to cause symptoms, to cause severe symptoms. Strangely enough, some bridges that are really deep don't cause as many symptoms as some that are superficial. Normally a deep one is bad, but sometimes for weird reasons, the shape and the striations of the muscle and the location, people don't notice them as much. So it's there's a lot of variety in the way that bridges present themselves in terms of symptoms and also not only symptoms, but the way they look on scans. So to conclude this, but also to point further to another aspect of this issue, on the left, you see the macro circulation, meaning the major epicardial coronary arteries on the left, the ones we've been talking about this whole time, LAD, LCX, PDA, RCA, et cetera. But on the right, those are the side roads, right? That's the same picture as the left, but also adding in the microcirculation, all the side roads that come off of the big roads, the side roads that finish the trip and bring the blood all the way to the destination, to the heart muscle. That's what you're seeing on the right. So it's wild, isn't it? That's what's really happening in your chest, right? There's all those little arteries are bringing blood, the smaller ones, into the heart muscle, while the bigger ones are really just feeding the smaller ones. So like the bigger branches of the tree, so to speak, are just feeding the smaller branches of the tree, and the smaller ones, the smaller arteries that are going, the smaller vessels, which are going into the muscle of the heart, into the myocardium, and allowing your heart to work. So that's a look at the coronary arteries with a particular view to myocardial bridges. There's a lot to understand about it, but I hope that gave you a better understanding. And you can come to our website, which is http://www.myocardialbridge.net, which has a lot of information. And you can also come to our Facebook Myocardial Bridge support group, making this in 2026. And we have over 3,000 people and counting. I hope to see you there.